Hello and welcome back to the Rekt Capital channel, and welcome to today's video about HODL analysis. So we're going to be looking at different types of investors and how they behaved during this 53% crash in Bitcoin's price action. So let's dive right in. We're going to be using on-chain analytics because, of course, data doesn't lie. It's all about us wanting to see what it says. And by delving deep into the data and on-chain analytics, we can definitely paint a clear picture as to what were the behaviors of long-term hodlers and short-term traders. So let's dive right in to the video. Very briefly about Bitcoin, we spoke about this yesterday. The 200 weekly exponential moving average is going to be a very important reference point for price going forward. This is going to decide the directional bias for Bitcoin. If we see a weekly close above the EMA, then it's probably going to be a very positive sign that we're seeing this level become a support. But if we see a close below this level, then it's probably going to be that this EMA has turned into a new resistance. So it's very simple on the weekly chart for Bitcoin in terms of its price action and what it could do potentially. So it's very important to just look at this very simple indicator. And again, not much has changed in terms of altcoin market cap dominance. We're seeing a breakout from the ascending triangle and now a very standard technical pullback in terms of altcoin dominance. We're most likely gonna revisit this region over here, the top of this ascending triangle, and just to flip that into a new support. But so far, so good. I wouldn't pay attention too much to this relief rally. I'm just watching for a return, a macro return to this level. But let's dive into the video because yesterday I spoke about minor capitulation and how it can potentially predict the Bitcoin bottom. So that was yesterday's video. Check it out if you missed it because it has been an interesting one. So let's have a look at this hash rate chart. Miners are capitulating. They are capitulating. Smaller mining operations are running out of money. They are closing business as we approach the halving because they won't be profitable. They aren't profitable with Bitcoin being at these prices. But what I want to focus on in this video is how did long-term holders behave on this 53% crash relative to the short-term traders. So, and to understand that, let's have a look at the spent output profit ratio. And this is a very fancy word just to showcase whether holders are selling at a profit or a loss. So we're talking about long-term hodlers right now. So essentially speaking, what we need to bear in mind is in black, we have Bitcoin's price action and orange is the SOPR. And every time we see the SOPR above 1, that means that long-term hodlers are selling in profit. But whenever we see the SOPR below 1, that's when long-term hodlers are actually selling at a loss. So just to make this a little bit clearer for you, I've outlined the ranging period for Bitcoin's price action before we saw that exponential uptrend to around 13,900. So this period essentially is the period right over here on the chart, right over here. This is the ranging period, the accumulation period before we saw a breakout past 4,150 to 13,900. So this is the period I'm going to be focusing on the on-chain analytics right over here. This is the ranging period, and as you can see, there's a lot of orange movement around here, which means long-term hodlers were actually selling at the bottom of the ranging period. So this is when a lot of long-term holders were starting to doubt Bitcoin and doubt that Bitcoin could recover or whatever the case may be. So we were actually seeing a lot of long-term hodlers sell and capitulate at the bottom. And that's a sad reality because usually holders are confident. They're more confident than short-term traders when it comes to the Bitcoin fundamentals, to the fundamentals of the protocol. They tend to hold and they're more likely to cope well with the volatility in Bitcoin's price action. So they're more than happy to just wait through the dips. And of course, they're not as strapped for cash in terms of, they're happy to park their money into that investment and just hold it and not touch it for a while, whereas short-term traders are more likely to invest very briefly in Bitcoin, but then if something happens, they're more than happy to quickly sell at a profit or a loss because they want to keep their money moving. So they don't want to park their money anywhere in particular for an extended period of time. So it's interesting to see that holders, long-term hodlers, are selling at a loss when we see a bottoming out period before we actually see a new bull market, a new bull trend towards the upside. So how did the long-term hodlers behave on this recent breakdown, on this recent 53% crash? Because remember, we saw a very strong crash in Bitcoin's price action, 53% crash, the worst drop in its history, one of the worst drops at least in its history. And what we need to look at is, as we see the price over here, we were still seeing profitability in terms of long-term hodling behavior. People, hodlers, long-term investors, they were still selling at a higher price point. So they were selling at a profit. So it's very likely that hodlers bought at a lower price point. And right over here, you can see that the SOPR is above 1. So they are selling in a profit quite nicely. But we have to look at this piece of price action as well as the SOPR. You can see that on this 53% crash, a few long-term hodlers actually sold at a loss. For the first time in a while, of course, we saw these fake outs towards the downside in terms of the on-chain analytics, in terms of the SOPR, but ultimately we've seen a very big dip for the very first time since around June 2019. So this is actually a very important thing to bear in mind. Long-term hodlers, long-term investors are actually selling in a loss because they're panicking themselves. They're panicking more so than short-term investors, because when we look at short-term investors, then we tend to see the SOPR below 1. So they're selling at a loss quite often. That tends to be the case quite often because, of course, they want to get in and get out of positions quite quickly, which is why we see longer spikes towards the downside when it comes to short-term traders compared to long-term hodlers. You can actually see here that long-term hodlers aren't likely to sell at a loss because, of course, here short-term hodlers, short-term traders, they're very happy. They actually tend to do that very often, that they sell at a loss just to gain that capital back because they want to have cash flow. They want to put it to work on a frequent basis, whereas hodlers don't really care about that. They just park their money and they want to see it appreciate. But of course, what we have to say about short-term traders is that they were very panicky in terms of selling their position on this recent 53% crash. You can see that this volatility in the SOPR is much more volatile over here compared to over here. But in any case, both long-term investors and both short-term investors were selling their Bitcoin positions at a loss. So why am I saying all of this? Well, this ties in with yesterday's video about minor capitulation and how it can potentially predict a Bitcoin bottom. You can actually tie this in with long-term investor selling behavior. If they're selling at a loss, then we might be close to a bottom. So if we look here at the selling behavior in the accumulation period before Bitcoin really took off, you saw a lot of hodlers selling a lot of their Bitcoin at a loss, which is very unfortunate. But now that we're here, it's very important to watch out for a potential ranging period and to see if long-term investors are also going to be selling at a loss. Is this going to be prolonged as we saw in this case? Because every time we see a dip in terms of the SOPR, you can see that Bitcoin tends to rally afterwards, and the same happens over here, right? So you can see that long-term hodlers are selling on this price dip over here because the black line is Bitcoin's price, but then we actually see a reversal towards the upside. And the same thing goes over here, right? So if you see this, you can actually see a rebound afterwards. Of course, this is a bit of a different context because this was a correction and this was a rally, an uptrend overall. So very interesting to see how long-term investor behavior actually can give us insight into where a potential bottom could come for Bitcoin. So we have to look at this going forward and tie this in with minor capitulation, which tends to happen prior to the halving. And if we can couple these two interesting on-chain analytics, then it paints a very interesting portrait of how long-term hodlers will be behaving. If they're selling at a loss over an extended period of time, then this could actually precede Bitcoin price reversals towards the upside. Because true capitulation occurs when even the hodlers start to sell. And we're at a time in the market where we have a lot of fear in the market. If we're just going to look at the coronavirus right over here, relative to Bitcoin's price action, you can see that the correlation is quite strong. Every time we see an increase in mentions of the coronavirus, Bitcoin's price action dumps towards the downside. So that's essentially tying in with the fact that coronavirus is threatening people's safety and physiological needs, like access to food, access to toilet paper even. You know, a few weeks ago, stocking up on toilet paper might have come across as a strange behavior, but now we're seeing that extreme fear caused by the coronavirus precedes extreme behavior. And this is why we're seeing self-quarantining, we're seeing stockpiling, because our safety, our health, our access to food, these base needs on Maslow's hierarchy of needs are being threatened, so investors aren't going to be focusing on self-actualization by investing in Bitcoin. It's very important to note that every time coronavirus mentions go to the upside, uncertainty and fear goes to the upside as well. And as you know, Bitcoin is an uncertain, volatile, speculative asset, which is why people who are uncertain, and that's most of the people in the world right now, given the situation. If people are uncertain, they won't want to increase their uncertainty by allocating a bit of their cash, which they really need to survival right now, and to stockpiling and just have that emergency cash position. They won't want to dedicate that to a high risk asset such as Bitcoin right now. And this ties in with what Yanir Bar-Yam actually says. Italy has 3 days with the same number of new cases. And the reason this is important is that we're seeing a slowing down in the curve of new daily confirmed infections in coronavirus in Italy. And of course, as you guys know from my previous video, a lot of these curves for many countries, these curves are actually exponential. So we're actually seeing an exponential growth rate in the new daily confirmed cases of new infections of the coronavirus. But what we're looking for is we're looking for that inflection point. The inflection point at which point we start to see a constant growth, like we're seeing in Italy. This is actually what Yanir is talking about, the inflection point, constant growth every single day before this growth actually starts to subside and turn into a logistic curve. So this inflection point actually precedes a slowing down in the progress of the exponential curve, turning it into a logistic curve where we see slowing in the progress of new daily confirmed infection rates for the coronavirus. But Yanir's charts here showcase to us that daily new confirmed cases are still very much on an exponential rise in France, on an exponential rise in Germany as well in Spain and in Switzerland as well. So it's just very important to flatten the curve going forward, because flattening the curve will benefit everybody worldwide. Of course, that's pretty obvious, but it will also benefit Bitcoin, which is why for Bitcoin to do well going forward, it's very important that this global uncertainty subsides, because afterwards Bitcoin would be able to recover and finally take off and resume its uptrend to potentially challenging for a new all-time high after the halving. And that's about it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you found the video enjoyable and valuable. And of course, please consider dropping a like if you found the video enjoyable and valuable. And of course, subscribe for more videos like this in the future. I'm more than happy to be pumping out this content on a daily basis. So subscribe, like the video if you liked it, and of course, stay tuned for more videos in the future. I'm Rekt Capital, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Speak soon.